Samsung phones, especially the Galaxy S version, seem to be the safe choice for wanting a flagship Android phone. While that's generally true, I have here the Samsung Galaxy S22 Plus, and I'm not a fan. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review. Here's the Samsung S22 Plus. If you want to get the quick answer, no, this phone is not worth it in my eyes, but if you want to find out why, let's get started. For me, there's two highlights of this phone. That being said, it's not a terrible phone, it's just one that I didn't really enjoy that well. The display, however, is amazing, even with its slight downsides. This 6.6-inch flat 120Hz 1080p OLED panel is fast and bright, rated at 1750 nits for peak brightness, but generally sits around 500 nits for normal usage with auto brightness turned off. By the way, that's pretty standard for phones that are advertised with 1000 plus nit screens, but only hit 500 to 700 in real-world testing, because the higher numbers are generally reserved for HDR content or direct sunlight. This is covered by Gorilla Glass Victus, and you can see that it doesn't really prevent scratches. Also, it's not drop-proof, obviously. There is a little hole punch for the front camera and an ultrasonic fingerprint scanner, the latter that works fine. I've never really been a fan of ultrasonic fingerprint scanners, but it is fast and somewhat reliable. When you put a screen protector on though, it definitely gets less reliable with some situations, like my S22 Ultra, where it locked me out of my bank because the scanner is just terrible. If you can, I would definitely rely on Face Unlock. Display-wise, absolutely amazing. Watching content and gaming on this panel is a treat and is to be expected on a flagship Samsung phone. This does continue the downgrade that the S21 Plus brought, which is a 1080p screen that leads to 390 pixels per inch density-wise, and it doesn't look terrible, but it also doesn't help the battery life. Also, this is a lower pixel density than the Samsung A53. Now, to be fair, it's not a huge deal, but at the launch price of $1,000, the $1,100 iPhone 13 Pro Max carried a 458 pixel per inch density, and generally Samsung flagships are known to outdo whatever the Apple equivalent does, but not in this case. To be honest, those are really just numbers that might affect some people, but for me, and I would say the average user, they're probably not going to care. Going flat and 1080p does, however, keep the repair costs down, seeing that even now the 1440p Samsung S20 Plus screens cost me more than the 1080p Samsung S22 Plus screens. One thing I do notice is that the screen is really tall. Not to the annoying point like a Samsung Z Fold, but in a way where I actually find myself accidentally touching the bottom of the screen when one-handed. A case will most likely solve this issue, as normally I put cases on my phone, but sometimes those top corner stretches could cause accidental touches. Of course, Hulk squeezing the phone doesn't help the situation if you are one of those people. Now, here's where I get confused. Coming from the Samsung S22 Ultra, I didn't think that there was going to be much of an issue, but it does feel like the refresh rate or touch sampling is a little bit different on this phone compared to that phone. Processor in this phone is the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, a processor I am used to and actually enjoyed, but in this phone, it didn't really work that well. I noticed that swiping out of apps or unlocking the phone to an app that was already open has some drop frames or a slight delay. As for app performance, it's perfectly fine, but leaving apps and switching apps just feels weird on the Samsung S22 Plus, but at the same time, it was fine when I was using the S22 Ultra. This does have slightly less RAM at 8GB, which can be expanded to another 8GB virtually, but I don't think that that's the issue. This comes with 128 or 256GB of UFS 3.1 storage, this one being the latter. That is not expandable, whether we're talking about physical or digital. To power this phone, we run into another issue. There is a 4500 mAh cell, which on paper sounds good, with 45 watts wired and 15 watts of wireless charging. You still get reverse wireless charging, which pretty much works on every Qi-capable device, except for the Pixel Watch and surprisingly the Samsung Watch 7. What's strange though is the charging speed, up from 25 watts in the S21 Plus, but also well needed because the battery just sucks. The battery life is worse than what I was getting on my S22 Ultra, which is not what I expected. This is probably why they put the 45 watt charging in this phone. I've actually never had an issue with other Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 devices until this phone, but I'm assuming that that might be the reason. The phone actually does get warm for just doing basic stuff, sometimes being warm just sitting in my pocket. Again, might be something I noticed because I went caseless, but I wasn't experiencing this with the Pixel 6a when I had that one caseless. Other internals include NFC, of course, Bluetooth 5.2, Wi-Fi 6, and 5G, with the millimeter wave or ultra-wideband models sporting this little antenna right here. Speaking of, let's talk about that metal frame. The top of the scratched phone has a single microphone, while the left side is filled with nothing. Pretty standard. The right side sports the volume and power buttons with a little ultra-wideband antenna under that. On the bottom is a SIM tray, which does not support a micro SD card, as usual. Then we have a microphone and a loudspeaker, which pairs with a little slit at the top of the phone screen for a stereo feel that's not best, but also not Pixel 9 bad. Then we have the USB-C 3.2 port that supports 5 gigabits per second, which is okay, not anything to write home about nowadays, and also pretty much what Samsung has used since the Samsung S8 Plus, even though it's gone from 3.1 to 3.2 for some reason. The frame is aluminum, while the front and back are both Gorilla Glass Victus, with the back having a matte finish and a cutout for the camera flash and 3 cameras, which are raised with the metal frame and the 3 camera glasses. I really wish the whole frame was a matte aluminum, which is ironic because most companies do this on their non-pro/ultra devices, but not Samsung. This is also capable of IP68 dust and water resistance, but obviously you want to take that claim with a grain of rice, given its age. Like I said, this is a tall phone at 6.2 inches, but slightly heavy at 196 grams. That said, it doesn't really feel too heavy, but it is a little bit taller than I would like. Samsung flagship cameras are strange to me, but also not. Like for example, we get 3 actually usable cameras on here, but all have different megapixel cameras that offer different options, but change the color and brightness as you switch through them. Then the Ultra versions turn that up to 11, making you wonder if these are flagship cameras or just upper mid-range. Regardless of the megapixel count, you will be impressed. Just the lack of uniformity is always strange to me. This also started the return to form, as the highest megapixel count is not the telephoto camera this time. Yeah, Samsung S20 and S21 were both 64 megapixel telephoto cameras, which weren't even optically zooming sensors, using a hybrid zoom, which is really just a digital zoom, probably sensor cropping to add a little bit more detail to get that 3x without actually being a true 3x camera like the S22 series. I know that was a little confusing. Anyways, the front camera on the S22 Plus is a 10 megapixel focusable sensor, being similar to what they've been using since the Samsung S10, but no longer since the S23. The sensor is nice, sometimes feeling soft when introducing slightly less light, but overall a well done sensor that focuses, but also can film 4K at 60 frames per second. The rear sensors start with a 12 megapixel fixed focus ultra-wide sensor, which is fine. I'm not really a fan of ultra-wide cameras, but it doesn't look that bad. Then we have a 50 megapixel optically stabilized main sensor that crops in to shoot 12 megapixel shots normally, but also 50 megapixel mode if you're that type of person. This does 4K 60 frames per second and 8K 24 frames per second if you care about the latter. While capable, they do not allow for 4K 120 frames per second, and I hate that this is probably going to be the new selling point for the Samsung S25. Honestly, these sensors surprise me because you think that the Ultra is the camera to get, but low-key, these sensors produce amazing shots. And of course, it looks good if you don't zoom like a normal phone shot. Lastly, we get the real telephoto sensor that is a 10 megapixel 3x optical zoom, being the smallest camera sensor, so shots aren't going to be amazing, but they still are pretty good and add a decent depth of field to the shot, as it uses the main camera for some help. If you shoot 4K 60 like me, it's cool that it can be done on all of these sensors, but you can't zoom through the sensors while recording, even if you pause. 8K will look better than ever on this phone since it's using the main sensor, so on principle it will be a better image, but it's still only 8K 24 frames per second, and it's compressed obviously. Regardless, photo and video time. Enjoy. See, there's no low quality like expected. They're actually good sensors, reminding you that Ultra phones aren't always needed. All this said, this phone is, like most Samsung phones, boring. Good boring, but I also don't know how to make this phone better. Samsung and Apple have always been good for people that just want a phone that works, with this one being no different. So maybe I just like the idea of having to get used to a phone. I like using this phone, but as some of you know, I carry an iPhone in whatever phone I'm reviewing. When I find myself reaching for the iPhone, I can tell that the phone that I'm using isn't really to my liking. The strange thing is that I felt this way on the first use, then I reviewed a few other devices and came back to the S22 Plus for a couple weeks, writing this review with over a month of combined usage, and I still feel that way. I don't understand the stutters and why the battery life sucks on this phone. But ultimately, is it worth it? Well, I'll let you be the judge, but looking at the S22 Plus and the S22 Ultra cost, it's almost half the cost, but not half the phone, so there, it makes more sense to choose the Plus over the Ultra. Looking at the OnePlus 10 Pro, which is actually a little bit cheaper in some cases, that might actually be your best choice. That said, on the OnePlus there might be some degradation in camera performance compared to the S22 Plus. Also, the same processor, if that's even a word, Motorola Edge Plus 22 seems to be a steal, especially when the repair cost for the part is half the cost of the S22 Plus. All of this said, the S22 Plus isn't a perfect phone, and truly it's a bad choice in my eyes. Bad battery is something that is fixable in a sense thanks to fast charging, but the weird frame drops isn't fixable, I don't think. Maybe it's the software, I don't know, but outside of that, it is a solid phone with a solid camera set and of course a solid screen. Also, it is running Android 14, and we get the latest updates being a Samsung flagship, minus the fact that Android 15 isn't going to be expected until after the S25 comes out. So who knows when we're going to get that small update. I do like the phone though, with the double tap to wake and sleep, lift to wake, and of course the nice little always on display. Face unlock for some reason seems to be more reliable on this phone compared to the S22 Ultra, and I'm not really sure why that is. And that's my review of the S22 Plus. Other than what I said, I'm not really sure why I wasn't a fan of this phone, because I liked using the S22 Ultra. I just didn't like the size. But at $200 to $300 used, this is a pretty good price and way better than any A series in that price range. But what do you think? Let me know, and as always, thanks for watching.